So I had Bernie first, Cedric first, DL first, and Steve first, and we know what that became. So,
Kings of comedy. Yeah.
I probably wouldn't be here talking to you, Chris.
So Raymond, do you want to kind of, give some background on yourself and kind of how we met?
Sure. So I believe my name is Raymond Lambert. I don't know, what do I do? I'm a social entrepreneur, author, filmmaker. I always say I kind of do things that I'm interested in. So, but I think me and you met. Chris, you may have to remind me. I know. Oh, we met through Will Haygood.
Yes.
Okay, so Will Haygood, I had the audacity of calling Will Haygood. Just so happens I got through the switchboard because I saw he was a great biographer, but I didn't know who he was.
And if I could interrupt you real quick, for those who may not be familiar with Will, so Will works for the Washington Post. He's from my hometown where I still live, Columbus, Ohio. We both started out at the Column Post newspaper. So Will and I have been friends for years and years. And Will wrote, he's written a lot of different biographies, but he wrote, first of all, he wrote the article that the movie The Butler with Oprah Winfrey and Forrest Whitaker was based on. And he wrote a biography of Sugar Ray Robinson.
That's the one I was reading.
Yeah, and so you were reading the biography and thought, hey, Will would be great to collaborate with on your autobiography, right?
Yes.
Okay.
And so I called him. I think he did Adam Clayton Powell too. Then he recently did Thurgood Marshall, right?
Yeah.
So I didn't know any of this. So I just cold called him and got through to his voicemail and sort of told him, who I was or what I was trying to do. And Will, being Will, who was like this incredibly like humble, self-effacing type person, was real kind. He called me back. He's like, I'm busy. I'm working on this story about this butler and this Thurgood Marshall book. And I started thinking to myself, like, he's probably thinking, who is this guy to call? Are you serious, son? So he was kind enough to say, but you know what? If you really want to do this, I've got a young man that I think you ought to call. And it was you. And then I called you and we talked. And then we sort of established, I think the thing I remember about you the most was you were like, oh, well, I'll drive. I'll just come in and we can sit down and talk. I'm like, Chris, like 5 hours from me. Oh, I do that for Prince concerts. And I was thinking, I wouldn't do that for a Prince concert.
Yeah, so people should know that, you're in Chicago, I'm in Columbus, which is 5 to 6 hours apart driving. Yeah, because I grew up in the Midwest and I grew up with car culture. Going on a road trip is nothing for me. But because you grew up in Delaware, where public transit is more common, going on a 5-hour road trip is just like a journey.
I can't even think of who I would drive 5 hours to see. I can't think of anybody. So that was like amazing. And then we spent like that day or whatever it was. I think you drove back the same day.
Yeah.
So I was like, that's the guy I want to work with. So I think that was when we sort of established that we were going to work together on this book, which I think took us, a couple years to write?
And it was published in January of 2016.
Okay.
If I'm not mistaken. Is that correct?
Yeah, that sounds right. Yep. Yeah. 2016. Yeah. So
a lot of it, so people know about our writing process. We just kind of wrote, you'd write some, and then I'd kind of like give you notes on what you wrote, then I'd write a little bit, then you'd give me notes on what I wrote. So it was just sort of back and forth through email. Yeah. And then like every now and then I'd just go ahead and drive to Chicago and you'd put me up in a hotel and we just kind of go over what we'd written and how far we had to go and kind of bounce ideas off, what you wanted to include and what you kind of didn't want to go into a rabbit hole about.
Sure.
Yeah.
Sure. I think in one of those happy accidents, I think we used to meet like every Wednesday or something like that.
Yeah. Yeah.
And then one of those happy accidents, did we do it first in third person? And then Doug's like, I like it, but I want it. What did we do?
Yeah. So I forget whose idea it was. You know what? I think I had like just read a biography, somebody's biography, and it was just so well written in third person. And so Doug Siebold, the editor and the publisher of Agate, he said, this is great, but I cannot publish an autobiography in third person. It has to be in first person. So we had to go back to the drawing board and put everything in first person. So it was your voice and it was more authentic than, you know, a
Yeah.
narrator telling your story.
And that was after a year of working on it. I think we submitted
Yeah.
it. It was, yeah. Okay.
Yeah,
So
there's whenever I think about that, I always think of the song "What a Fool Believes" by the Doobie Brothers. The lyric, trying to recreate what is yet to be created, or
hey,
something along that lines. It just reminds me of that.
I was like,
To me,
what?
it didn't really take that much effort to me to
Right.
put it in first person. It was just kind of like taking what we already had and just kind of flipping it to your
Yeah.
voice.
Yeah. It ended up being a great exercise. So it didn't take that much time after that. So we were very familiar with the material. So it worked. That worked out really well.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, and then we had like a series of like book events. There was
Yes.
one in DC, right? There was
Yes, we
the
did.
Poets and Prose in DC.
We did that. We did. Then Reed Smith, the law firm, hosted an event for us at their
Yeah,
at their firm. We did that one. We did obviously we did Columbus.
yeah.
We did a small thing here. I don't think you came to that. And where else?
And you went back to your high school alma mater and
Yeah, I
spoke, right?
did. I went to my high school. I went to grad school. I went to Morehouse too for
Okay,
one event.
okay,
Um, that's one of my regrets that we've talked about, like the promotional strategy and the effort, because I
yeah,
became uncomfortable with the idea of talking about myself, and
okay.
that, like, how can you not? I mean, this is a memoir or whatever, so how can you not do that?
Well, let me ask you about that. So, since you're uncomfortable, admittedly, talking about yourself, what made you want to do the memoir? And people should know that the story of the club, all jokes aside, which launched the careers of any big comedian you can think of who got their start in the '90s: Chris Rock, Steve Harvey, D.L. Hughley, Monique, Carlos Mencia. You know,
Yeah,
started there in Chicago with you and your business partner James Alexander. And
sure.
the
Funny business.
documentary was called Funny Business, right?
Right, right.
And that aired on Showtime after
That had no
playing
sense.
several big film festivals.
Yes.
So who had initiated the documentary? Who was it? You that initiated
So
the documentary?
yeah, well, it sort of came about happenstance. I never saw the story as a documentary.
Okay,
I saw it as a feature film. And I still see it that way. I still see it as or a series or something of that nature.
okay,
And there was a guy that I worked with at Comedy Central, had done some events with.
okay,
Um, and I bumped into him here in Chicago, and he asked me about what had happened to the club. And he was a producer. His name was John Davies, and he was a producer and had done docs in the past. And I didn't know that because I knew him as a comedy special producer. And then when I told him, all the ordeal that we went through, he goes, "That feels like a documentary." And I thought, never thought of it. And then he had been to the club, so he knew the story. And as a matter of fact, his boss was Jerry Abrams, who was J.J. Abrams' father, who
oh
was a big
wow,
fan. I know I need to reach out to him right
yeah,
about now.
really,
Right? I really do. So I'm gonna make a mental note of that. So anyway, John's like, we should explore this. And can you do me a favor and write every headliner that you ever booked? I had all the lists, but I had never looked at it in totality. And that's when I looked and I went, yikes, this is pretty incredible. Because I'm like, wow, I never put it all together. And then that's when that journey started. And that took about 4 years to produce
right.
from beginning to end. So yeah. But then what I found with the doc was that it was only 90 minutes long. And this is a 10-year story. So it's hard to tell a 10-year story in 90 minutes. That's what precipitated me wanting to do the book. And I always wanted to write a book. So I thought, well, I had structure. I knew the narrative. And then I thought, okay, let's do this. So I just wanted to tell the story. I didn't want to actually go out and sell it. You know what I mean? So, or promote it as an author. I just wanted to, I actually became a writer in that sense that it's like, here's the book, it does what it does. You know what I mean? And I fell down on that part.
But I have to say though, I mean, it's very few authors that, I mean, because you did some really extensive market research
Yeah.
before we even started writing, and even before I joined the process of
Sure.
helping you tell your story, you had already done like a very detailed synopsis and book proposal.
Yes.
So I kind of added a little bit to it, but Agate was like, wasn't that the first publisher you would
Yes.
approach because you
Yep.
knew they were Chicago based
Yes.
and they were perfect, because
Yep.
the club was based in Chicago, you were in Chicago.
Yeah.
So, I mean, it was like, you didn't have to go through a whole bunch of agents and a whole bunch of
Right.
rejections.
Yeah.
The very first publisher you approached accepted your
Yeah.
book proposal.
Yeah, and I know how rare that is because I had thought about something before that, another book idea I had about fatherhood that I was thinking at one point. And I went through that whole get an agent, go to, a little bit. I got so many rejections, but, I was like, this is nuts. And it just so happens that that worked out with Doug being here. And he had done some offbeat stuff like that before, and it worked out really well. I think that was a great place for us, I think, really.
Right, right. Yeah, because it was small enough that they gave individual attention and they specialize in stories about the African American
Yeah.
experience.
Yeah.
Plus, being based in Chicago, it was like a perfect fit.
It really was. So, so obviously looking back on it, and I guess we'll talk about that, what my general feelings are, because I still think there's an opportunity for this book. But yeah, I think that's where I had the plan, I just didn't execute on it.
Yeah, I think here in Columbus, people that read the book were always like, Raymond has such an inspirational story since you grew up. Your parents were teen parents, and you
Yeah.
were the first in your family to go to college, right?
Yes. Yeah.
So a lot of people said, hey, Raymond should do like a course or, do a whole bunch of speaking engagements and, sell the book at the back of the room after the speaking engagements, just kind of, motivational speaking type engagements.
Yes.
So
Yeah.
I definitely think there's still a lot of opportunity there because your
Right.
story is timeless.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah. I need to, I think I finally reached that point. This year was kind of the year I was like, okay, it's time to go ahead and do this. And of course, the bottom drops out of everything,
Yeah.
But I think things will just be delivered differently. That's all.
Yeah.
I think they happen, but the way in which they get delivered will be different. But I still think those opportunities are there. And I remember your mom, I think about her all the time telling me that, like, when are you going to write a course? When are you going to do a course? Go talk. What are you doing?
Yeah.
And I have an aunt who told me, who since deceased, she was around when we first wrote the book. And she used to say, how dare you be so selfish not to share your story with people?
Yeah.
I thought, what? I had never thought about it like that. But I do want to do that. So I'm finally, this has been the kick in the pants that I needed to say, you know what, let's do it. And I think it's a great time in the sense that I feel like you can be on the cutting edge of how the new way of things are being done.
Right.
And that's exciting to me.
Right.
So, yeah.
So we were talking a little bit earlier before we started the interview part about the All Jokes Aside collective that you've been working on.
Yes.
Can you kind of talk about that?
Sure. So that idea had been around. I always wanted to do something. Well, it even goes back before that because it probably started around 94. And I used to do an event, which was a annual fundraiser it was called Education is No Joke. And it was to raise money for scholarships for Chicago public schools students that were going to attend historically Black colleges. So we do once a year. I get the top 20 headliners from that year. We run 5 days. It was the highlight of the year. And we raised a nice amount of money. And we ran that for about 7 years. So I thought I don't want to do a club, but I could do that event on an annual basis and then make it bigger and stronger and have a social component to it. It could really be something. So I kept tinkering. And I recently been told that I suffer from perfectionism. So, you know what I mean? Like kind of tinkering, and it never goes anywhere. And that was one of those ideas that I kept tinkering. So the collective, the idea is about how can we leverage the power of stand-up to affect social change? And how can we come together, raise money, awareness for folks that are on the front lines are really being impactful, but they don't have the megaphone and they don't have the funding to really be effective. Mm-hmm. And now I think it's even more open to different ideas and different thoughts. And I struggled with, I couldn't get a big name to sign on, but then I thought I didn't have big names when I started All Joke. I just started and it built and, that's how things go. So I'm going to just start. It's a community foundation. Whoever wants to come do it, we'll do it. I know what talent is. So if I have to start with all new people, I'll start with all new people. And, but I think I think comedians are uniquely positioned to change things. And what I notice is they talk about a lot of things, but the execution part never happens. So we just end up, even what's taking place in Georgia right now, which I feel obviously is a travesty of justice. But I tend to see everybody's talking about it. But I'm like, okay, but do we have an adequate defense fund so that we make sure that this doesn't happen again, or that this is happening all over the country and we want to address these issues? I feel like it's our turn. You know what I mean?
Yeah, and just to be clear, you're talking about the young man who was shot down by the so-called vigilante neighborhood people who claimed they were mistaking him for a burglar, even though there was no burglary report filed. There have been a lot of walks in the young man who was slain in his honor, but it's like hashtag activism. I'm virtue signaling by putting on social media how much I support the cause, but what am I actually doing is what you're saying, right?
That's exactly what I'm saying. Yeah. And I think the time and the energy is great, but it needs to be, to me, structurally, it needs to be in such a way that, I like organizations like the Jewish Defense League. You know what I mean? It's like, you'll hear from them when it's necessary.
Yeah.
But they're continually working and monitoring and seeing what's happening, and they make change happen.
Right.
So anyway, I think comedians are uniquely positioned to talk about subject matter and to bring attention to it. And I want to do the background work, the gritty stuff, get the hands dirty and do that part of it. So I think it's a perfect combination. At least that's the goal. So we'll see.
I think it's a great idea.
Thanks, Chris.
Yeah.
Give it a shot.
So as far as the reaction to All Jokes Aside, the book, what kind of reaction did you get from friends and family? Were there any friends or family who said, "Oh, I didn't know that about you," or "I didn't know that it happened to you in your childhood"? Or
and the first one probably comes from my daughter, who I think she only got past maybe chapter 2 or 3, because chapter 2 is pretty hard.
Yeah.
As far as my background, my father, her grandmother, grandfather, I think was a little bit much for her. And probably some family members thought that too. But we had talked about, once you do a memoir, it's just not right if you don't just let it be. You know what I mean? It's like, you got to let folks in. And all of that shapes me anyway. So, I think, but the beauty of it was, I think everybody who read that book, I don't think they were all blowing smoke either. Really enjoyed it. They really liked it. They were either inspired by it or motivated by it. I got very little. I think if we would have gotten that book in the right hands, that could have made all the difference in the world. Because I didn't get one, I don't think we got one negative response about it whatsoever. Right. So we didn't push for New York Times, LA, which I think would have been naturals, right? Those are still possibilities. But everybody who read it seemed to enjoy it. I don't know if that was your experience too.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, like I said, the people here in Columbus and even outside Columbus, people that, in fact, I did a podcast about the wrestling documentary I made, and the guys who do the podcast are comedians, and they were like, "Oh, we're really interested in the story of All Jokes Aside." So everybody, whether they're related to me or not, they said they found your story fascinating, and just the different aspects of your life, because having grown up in poverty, then being the one of a few, or I don't know, were you one of the few or only Black students at the Catholic high school where you went?
It was low. It's low.
Just a
2-3%.
Yeah, that's something we had in common, because I went to Catholic school for elementary school, and I was one of a handful of Black kids.
Yeah.
But then you became an investment banker,
right?
And worked for Chris Gardner, whose life was the basis of the best-selling book and the movie Pursuit of Happiness. Right. And then the story about Steve Harvey. That's just really that opens the book. Did you want to tell that real quick?
Yeah. So of course he wasn't Steve Harvey at the time. And but he still acts the same as he does now. So he didn't lack the confidence. Let me put it that way. And it was a real interesting time because we couldn't afford a hotel for him the night before, so he had to stay with James. And then that Friday, we couldn't get a hotel for him until Friday, so he had to come in Thursday night. And we had just developed a relationship with a radio station here called WGCI, which was #1 in the marketplace. And the guy really liked what we were doing. He's like, you can start bringing comics here. I'm going to charge you low rate. And Steve was the first person that we were going to bring there. So I'm reading Steve the Riot Act about, we're going to go in. And Doug Banks was the local DJ at the time who ultimately became a syndicated star. Him and Tom Joyner were on the same station. And, I'm telling Steve, we're going to go in here and we got 5 minutes. We'll do our thing, tell a couple of jokes, and then we're going to leave. And let's see what happens. I'm trying to build this relationship. So Steve's like, you don't tell me how to do radio, how to do this. I'm a storyteller. I mean, he's going off on me, So I'm like, look, man, we got 5 minutes. Let's hit it and get out of here. So he gets in, he's having fun, and, it was hilarious. Everybody was enjoying him. And it's a morning drive. So Doug is having a good time, staff, everybody. And then Doug says, well, Steve, thanks for coming by. Steve's at All Jokes this weekend. Go see him. He's going through the shows and all that. And then Steve just says, what are you talking about? I didn't get up this early to leave. I'm staying here. So I'm looking at him like, are you crazy? And I'm thinking to myself, he's ruined me. I'm like done, out of business. But all the salespeople, all the general managers, all the people were coming out of the office. The phones were ringing off the hook. People were just like going bananas over him. And they allowed us to stay. So we were up there for about 2 hours. And that was the pivotal moment that changed the trajectory, I want to say, of All Jokes. Because we were really on the brink up until that point. We were like, we got about another 2 weekends for this experiment, and then we got to go. And from that point forward, the rest was history. And then not only for that, I'm going to remind him when we go back for this book this time, which I didn't even call him about this book. That started his radio career because he started sitting in for Doug Banks. And then once Doug went syndicated, he took Doug's job. So Steve was living in Chicago doing that morning radio show for years. And then obviously we see what happened to him. I think he may owe me a few dollars at least a couple of bucks. Really. So anyway, that was the story there. And he did the club for another 3 or 4 years. And I always say that I didn't have the vision. I had become a club purist. Like, that's where comedy happens. That's where you see the best. And if the comic can't see everybody in the audience, that's not really an experience. And then as they started to grow and tickets started to go faster, they started saying, let's do another venue. I was reluctant to do that. And then before I knew it was too late. So I had Bernie first, Cedric first, DL first, and Steve first. And we know what that became. So,
Kings of comedy. Yeah.
I probably wouldn't be here talking to you, Chris. So, but anyway, I'm still here. So we'll see what happens this time.
Right. And I think there were so many stories, like how you related that Chris Rock, everybody thinks he's this, extroverted,
right.
For lack of a better word, loudmouth, but how off stage he's kind of an introvert. And he didn't say anything when you picked him up on the ride from the airport to the club. He just didn't say anything.
He didn't talk at all. And then he didn't talk hardly at all, like a couple words here and there. And then as he warmed up, we talked a little bit more, but off stage, he was very introverted. I had club owners call me and say, what's up with Chris? Like, you think we did something to him? Or, do you think he doesn't like us? Or I'm like, he just don't talk that much unless he got something to say at that time. And I always use him as an example of how, I tell young people, you don't need a posse. You just need like 1 or 2 people who really like you and that you can trust and believe in. That's all you need. You don't need 50 people around. And he's the perfect example of that. And I think he still travels pretty light compared to everybody else. Now, Steve got an entourage. He got security, he got a manager, agent, somebody with the club,
Valet.
all of that. Absolutely. I'm sure he probably has a driver, a butler. He probably got it all. But it's whatever works, But Chris was definitely an introvert off stage.
Now, who was the comedian that you had to turn the lights off on because he kept going over his time? Because you were a stickler for being professional, and your set shouldn't run over because you didn't want other people's set to have to be cut off.
I call that the Joe Torre. That's Guy Torre's brother.
Joe Torre.
Joe Torre Rule. So we had the rule where we'll give you a light with 5 minutes to go. So it's rapping. Then I give it to you a minute, so you got to be going into whatever you're doing. And then in comedy, everything's on time. So if we got this specifically set. So if you go over, you throw off the whole thing, from seating to bar preparation because we got to clean up the showroom. It's a disaster. And we prided ourselves on being on time because that's not one of our culturally strong points. So I was determined that if it was 8:30, it was starting at 8:30. So Joe just decided, because he had been around a little while too, he just ignored me. Kept ignoring the light, he saw me, I got closer. It just kept going. And then he would say things like, "Do you guys want me to leave?" He's so good, the audience thinking they're getting something extra. Right. He just stayed. Then we ended up turning the lights, all the lights on in the showroom. Then we turned the mic. Then I just had to go up to the stage and say, "You got to go." Now, what made that even more intense was he's a member of Omega Psi Phi fraternity, and I'm a Kappa. So then it got fraternity stuff started happening within it because he had a lot of his fraternity brothers were there, and they were like, who is he to tell you? I'm like, I'm the one who's running this whole thing, and I'm not scared of no cues. Okay, so anyway, it got real heated, but that became where I set a rule that for every minute you go over, it's $100. So if you want to stay up there all night, you can, but you're doing it for free. So and then the other thing we would do, I try to say to them is, the next audience, while that audience enjoyed themselves, the next audience made you pay the cost by not buying drinks. You made me wait outside, you 15 minutes behind, I ain't buying nothing. Even if they were enjoying the show. So it cost all the way around. So anyway, Joe Torre, I love him. He's a brilliant stand-up comedian, but he was hard to work with, which is why he probably, I don't know. Some people may find him hard to work with. I didn't in the end. Once we had an understanding, it was like, Joe, we can't do that. But I can see how somebody would say, "Damn, Joe, hard to work with." I can see how somebody could say that. But,
and you also had rules for the audience as well, right? Because so I remember the story you told about the man who was like trying to show off and ordering all this champagne.
Oh yeah.
He didn't want to tip.
Yeah. Well, that's a cultural thing too.
Yeah.
I found it to be true because it's like, everything was a training process. Like, it was a training process for the staff.
Right.
It was a training process for the comedians, and it was a training process for the audience. So I was taking all the experience that I had learned from, whether it be college, business school, Wall Street, Fortune 500 companies. I'm like, we're going to run this the right way. And we all going to participate so that we all can win. So with him, his thing was, which wasn't unusual, he had a tip amount in his mind that he paid for tip, no matter what. If he spent $1, he tipped $5. If he spent $150, he tipped $5. That's just his tip. So he's I don't know how he came up with that calculation, but he's a baller. So he got 2 girls with him. He's champagne drinking. I think his bill might have been, it's over 100. It had to be maybe 150. We doing fresh glasses for him. It's a lot to do that. And he tipped $5. And the staff's like, that guy tipped me $5. Now, they're not going to complain in front of the customer. So sometimes you win, sometimes you lose. But I just happened to be there and overheard it. And I was in that mood that day. So I'm like, who is this guy? So I went over to him and I said, hey, listen, just curious. Notice that your bill's $150 and you tipped $5, just curious about the service, because that says that either you don't like the service or something's wrong. And that's when I learned that he does that. And he was adamant about it, like, this is it. So then I just tipped them the appropriate amount, whatever it was, out of my pocket, like right there on the spot. I said, tipping is, I think at the time was 15%. Dude, you know, that's appropriate. They worked really hard for you. It's 15%. And then I just tipped them myself to be an example. So that enforced it for my staff that I'm supporting. You know what I mean? So it's all these lessons happening all the time. So
Right.
yeah, you got it.
And that's why I think there's so many lessons in your story. I mean, and also the staff, like they had to wear uniforms, they had to be professional. You were very professional about bookkeeping and accounting and taking inventory of all the alcohol and everything. So it's like you really tried to set, or you did set that standard, that bar very high. This is a professionally run business. This is not, this is not a, stereotypically what people think of, the stereotypes that people have in their minds of Black businesses of being lax on everything.
So, and it was like, you know what, this is coming up when we talk about the next book, which I think is more instructional, right? Mm-hmm. Which to say, I never asked my staff to do something I wasn't willing to do.
Right.
So I'll clean the bathrooms. If on that Joe Torre night, instead of you having bathroom duty, I'm gonna do it because I know Joe went over 20 minutes and you don't have time to do both. I don't have a problem doing that. Right. I believe leadership should happen. You should lead from the front, so I didn't have a problem. Whatever I'm asking you to do, I'm willing to do. And I'm going to do it and we're going to win. So, that's just my way of doing it. I just feel like I wanted it to be a place I like to work. That was the overarching philosophy. I'm going to make this somewhere I'd be happy to go to work every day. So it worked out.
Yeah. And eventually you and James, your business partner, were able to leave your day jobs as investment bankers, right? And just do the club full time, right?
Well, I was the only one dumb enough to do that.
So James kept his job, okay.
So he's a multi-millionaire somewhere around town. He wasn't gonna do that. Because you never, and that's another thing I talk about, this thing about entrepreneurship being overrated. It's highly unlikely, unless I did a chain, that I would ever approach making the money I can make doing what I was doing. But I wasn't doing it for that reason. We need money, obviously, from a practical standpoint, but I wanted to build something that I could be really proud of. And if I can meet my needs versus my worth, then I was cool with it. James was more of a capitalist than me in that regard. So, I don't regret that, but that was my approach. I just like the idea of creating. So that's the artist part versus the business person part.
Right.
Yeah.
So speaking of creating, so interestingly enough, since All Jokes Aside was published, and I wanted to do this interview because it's the 4-year anniversary of the book being published. And I thought, okay, we've graduated after 4 years and it's interesting that we both moved into documentary filmmaking.
That is.
So can you talk about the Maya Angelou documentary that you were involved with?
So another one of those things where I just fell into, you know what I mean? After I did The Funny Business, a guy who was associated with that project on the sides of it, had consulted on it, said he was doing Maya Angelou, would I want to work on that? And I thought, I didn't think I wanted to do another doc because they're so hard, they take so long, and you make, if you get a good sandwich and a good meal out of it, you're like thankful.
Yeah.
So, but I thought, it's Maya Angelou, you know what I mean? Like, I couldn't even believe that story hadn't been told. And because she wrote so many books, that's why I think she was reluctant even to do it, because like, well, I wrote 30 books. I mean, what else is there to say?
Yeah.
Like, well, if you ain't on audio, if it's not in video these days, it don't really matter. So I just took that and said, I got to work on this. And then I was working with Chris Gardner again. We consulted together and worked on that project together, which was amazing. And what ended up happening there, it went on to do really well, won a Peabody. But the regret was I learned a lot about documentary filmmaking from that on a high level. I think it should have done much better than it did commercially. But, I learned. But she died. So I was supposed to meet her like 2 or 3 weeks before she died.
Wow.
And it was like, are you kidding me right now? Because she never saw the film. So that was the the down part. You know what I mean? That kind of sent the project in a little bit of a tailspin. But then one of the guys who was working on that film was called me afterwards. I said, dude, I'm not doing another doc. No way, man. He says, well, would you take a look at this little sizzle thing I put together? It's like, tell me, anybody that might be interested in for me to call or work on. And it was of Harold Washington.
Mm.
And I knew him, but not really. You see his name on buildings, you know who he was. But I'm like, this is gonna be my last doc for sure. I'm done. This is it. So I've been on that for 4 years, and we should be done. A really good, solid rough cut in June.
Okay.
We got an agent, a really good agent. So all the things I learned on Maya, I'm trying to apply to this situation. And of course, the bottom falls out now. Where how is this gonna work now? Because there's no festivals, theaters, or both of those are two major components, right? But trying to be optimistic about things. It's going to be interesting to see how things are distributed and how things are going to get sold in this new world order. But so I'm happy and content about working on it because I think it's going to be really good, and I'm going to do some music around it, which is I haven't done that before, so that'll be fun.
When you say do music, like you're going to compose music, or?
So we're going to do a soundtrack.
Oh, okay.
Or at least I want to.
But you're going to do it yourself, or you're going to hire musicians to do it?
I'm gonna work with a couple local producers.
Okay.
And we might license some music. We might do some original music.
Okay.
He was such a beloved figure in this city. And if you think about the talent that comes out of here, there's nobody, for the most part, if you over 40, that you weren't impacted by him. So I'm hoping that I might be able to attract a star or two, because if anybody I tell I'm working on this project locally, they got a story. You know what I mean? It's like, and then you think about, we've got 4 people in it that worked on both Harold's campaign, and they took those lessons and worked on Obama's campaign. So when you think about it, we draw a direct line from Harold to Obama. It's like a direct line.
Absolutely.
So I think that might be really interesting to do a soundtrack around his life in that time, and everybody's got some strong feelings about it. So I'm thinking that might be something interesting to do. So I'm gonna try that out. I've never done that. So I'm thinking that's it, man.
Yeah, and so the big documentary project that I've been working on since All Jokes, I had started on it. Pardon?
The wrestler one?
The wrestling documentary. So this is called Lady Wrestler. It's about the history of Black women in professional wrestling. And I got to interview a couple of legends, Ethel Johnson and Ramona Isbell, who were among the first Black women who started in the sport in the 1950s. And I grew up in Columbus, Ohio, did not know that at one time in the, from the 30s up through the 50s, that Columbus was like this huge wrestling center. There was this man named Billy Wolf, who was like the Vince McMahon of his time, who set up shop in Columbus. And he was a white man, but he thought that recruiting Black women into professional wrestling would be like this kind of controversial thing that would draw more fans. And it did. And a lot of these women, I came to find out in my research, there were dozens of these Black women all over the country that were, in their day, they were as famous as like Venus. Well, Ethel was definitely as famous as Venus and Serena.
No way.
So getting to interview her, she passed away in September of 2018, but getting to interview her was really an honor. And also Ramona Isbell, who's still living. These women are just so gracious and mild mannered. You would never think that they were wrestlers. They're moms and their grandmothers. And so I had actually, what you were saying about the theatrical situation. So I had actually planned to release the documentary in 2018, like just release it to streaming services.
Sure.
And then I kept getting invitations to show at places like this place called the Museum of the Moving Image in New York invited me to do a showing. And then I got invitations from a couple film festivals, and then just media people like radio stations and podcasters would contact me and say, hey, would you want to do an interview about your documentary? And maybe you could have a screening in our city or whatever. So I'd actually planned to have like a tour. And then, so the tour was going to happen this year. And then, as as we both know, COVID-19 breaks out, and who knows when theaters and places where you can have
Right.
screenings will be fully functional again.
Right.
So my plan is just to go ahead and release it digitally, because I have people all the time emailing me. Like I've had people as far away as Istanbul, Turkey, saying,
Really?
a library in Istanbul, Turkey, with the universities, like, we want to buy a copy of your DVD, and I'm like, well, it doesn't exist yet. It will soon. So
That's
I'm just
a
figuring now is the time to just go ahead and release it. I want to get it out there because I want as many people as possible to know about these women's stories.
I
And
think it's
plus, the families of the women have been very patiently waiting as well. So I don't want to just keep
right.
dragging it out.
No,
Yeah.
I think it could be a great time for that because I see everything's going. I saw some ad yesterday for a Tracy Ellis Ross movie. Straight watch it at home is the new thing. But if you think about and the ad was like watch it. I'm sure that was going to be a theatrical release.
Okay.
But it's like, how are things going to show up now? How
Yeah.
you do that. But if you think about it though, theaters were already teetering on. The last stat I saw before this thing even happened was that 75% of all movies are watched at home.
Yeah.
So it's only nerds like me and you who are like, I got to see it on the big screen.
And
you know
also
what I mean?
the big blockbusters like
Right.
the
That's
Marvel
it.
movies and
Yeah.
the big action movies.
Yeah.
Those still
Yeah.
draw people to
Yeah.
theaters. The
They
Star
do.
Wars movies.
Right.
But as far as the like small
Independence.
documentaries and art house movies,
It's hard.
yeah.
You get a nice little run. And I think those will always exist. I want to believe that those will always exist.
Right.
With the right combination of things. But
Yeah.
I see that number going up higher. Like it may be 85%. I mean, that's just the reality of the situation.
Yeah.
You probably can get a 100-inch screen in your house nowadays.
Oh,
It's
yeah.
not the same to me, but that's the reality of it, So
Yeah. And then the other movie project that I completed, since all jokes aside, was and I told you about this, and you actually met the actors who were in it.
that's right, I did.
So it's a movie. It's a period movie set in 2008 during the Great Recession, and it's called Things Are Tough All Over, about a couple struggling to keep their heads above water during the Great Recession. And it's so weird. It's almost, it's like I have to be careful in marketing this movie that I'm not trying to capitalize on the current downturn in the economy, because there's so many weird things, like the husband and wife both getting laid off, them having to homeschool their children because they don't want to send their kids to the local public school. So many things that are like so many parallels to today. It's just really, and you know what a really, really bizarre twist is? So the lead actress, Jacqueline Childs, she was like, did you know there's another movie called Things Are Tough All Over? And I was like, no. And she's like, it's actually a Cheech and Chong movie. So one day I was just kind of flipping through YouTube, and a trailer for the Cheech and Chong movie, it was released in 1982. When I was a kid, I didn't get Cheech and Chong at all. I was like, I don't understand this stoner humor. I'm very much a square. I don't smoke weed or anything. I'm like, I don't get this humor. So I'm like, let me just go ahead and watch this movie just to say I saw it. There were so many like, I'm thinking, did I happen to see this movie like on cable late at night when I was a kid and just didn't realize it? Because it's set in Chicago, just like my story.
No way.
There's a scene where they're at the laundromat and they run out of change. That happens to the couple in my movie. And I swear to God, I've never seen this movie. But the rest of the movie it's just like this crazy road trip where they leave Chicago and go on this crazy road trip to Vegas. But I'm like, I have absolutely nothing in common with Cheech and Chong, but somehow I managed to make a movie with the same title and a couple of the same scenes.
That's crazy.
Yeah.
Now that's done. Where are you with that?
So we finished shooting, and I'm in the editing process.
Oh, nice.
So, and I was debating about, should I go the festival route, but now who knows if festivals, are even going to be just completely virtual now, or, if they're ever going to be held at theaters again.
And the other thing I was thinking about festivals is that people come from all over the world under normal circumstances.
Yeah.
So, when does that happen again?
Yeah. Yeah.
I think it will, but I think maybe that's the optimist in me. It's like, maybe that's 2 years from now.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? That window is a couple years away. Or maybe, I don't know. We'll see. But how long, is it like a feature? It's like 90 minutes?
Yeah. It's about the same length as the wrestling documentary, about 80 to 90 minutes.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's perfect. That's awesome, man.
Yeah.
That's exciting.
Thank
You're a
you.
filmmaker, for real.
Yeah, I mean, that's what I dreamed of as a kid. So being an author
Really,
and a filmmaker. So
I never dreamed of any one of those two, which is kind of like, it's like I never thought of that at all. I like movies a lot.
yeah,
And, as I thought back about it, and I like comedy a lot too. I used to listen to albums all the time. So I guess it was like, somehow coming along. And I love books. So it's like, I think that's one thing I did want to do is write a book one day.
okay,
So that sort of fell in there. But so maybe I was like this subconsciously interested in that.
right,
Um,
right.
but no, it is what it is. I
Yeah,
bitch and moan about it, but we are creating content that could live forever, and
yeah,
it's kind of special.
yeah. And one thing I plan, I haven't started on it officially, but one thing I plan to do is write my own memoir
Okay,
about the experience of growing up in an interracial family.
you told
Um,
me about that.
yeah, yeah. And I think what sets my story apart is that a lot of people or I've read other memoirs by, people who are either biracial or they have a white step parent or whatever. Like I have three white step parents.
Okay,
And there's always like some tragic, traumatizing moment where, their family is, somebody burns the cross on their lawn or something like that. And I'm not trying to minimize people who've gone through trauma. But I think what sets my story apart, it was just, I had the most ordinary Midwestern upbringing. We were never, my family was never ostracized. We were never stared at. We were never, oh, what's that black woman doing with that white man? I just had this very, very ordinary upbringing. And I didn't know my family was different until I was an adult. And people would see me and my biracial siblings and say, oh, well, you two don't look alike. Or, we'd be in a grocery store and somebody would come up and start speaking Spanish to, my sister who they thought was Mexican or something. So I just had this very unusual upbringing and didn't know it until I was an adult.
that's hilarious. Oh my God, that is
Yeah,
terribly funny and
yeah.
appropriate. You know what I mean? That's like timely too. 'Cause I watched that new series, Kenya Barris.
Oh, Black AF.
Yeah, I watched it. I mean,
Yeah, and
that's
I
his
watch
thing. He's
Blackish
locked
and I
into it.
watch Mixedish
Yeah,
too. So yeah,
yeah.
like
Oh,
you're saying, this seems to be kind of a theme that's going
yeah.
on right now.
He's locked into that.
Yeah.
But yeah. So anyway, but that's timely though. That's hilarious. In the Midwest though, that's what makes it even more interesting.
Yeah, and my stepfather is from the heart of Trump country in this little small town in northern Ohio called Mount Gilead.
Mm,
And we would go there for holidays. And I mean, nobody ever mentioned me or my mother's race. I mean, it, it was like we go up to their house and they'd be playing country music, and me and my mom were the only, were only black people. And I mean, I didn't have anything to compare it to, so
right.
I didn't think it was strange.
That's funny. Oh my
Yeah,
God. That's hilarious. Well,
yeah,
yeah, I look forward to reading that.
cool, cool.
Um, but yeah, but anyway, so yeah, man. So I do think there's something to do with the book. I think, you and I had talked about that,
Hmm.
and we'll talk further about it. I think there's still room for it out there because it's, like you said, I think it's a timeless story. I mean,
Yeah,
you know, and I'm more comfortable in saying that. In the past, I'd be like, oh, what am I talking about? My story's time. You know what I mean? It's like you go
yeah.
through that whole thing. But it is, though. So, and there's some kid out there that probably teenage parents, first one to go to college, or people out there to dream about some ideas. So yeah, I think we should think about that.
So if people want to get in touch with you and find out more about how they can get involved with All Jokes
Yep.
Collective when you launch
Yep.
that, how can people reach you?
So we have a site up right now. It's alljokesasidecollective.org.
Okay.
We're on all social media now. We just went up with them. All Jokes Aside, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram. It's under All Jokes Aside Collective. And then Raymond Lambert, you can find me on all the social media handles, and I try to post regularly. And hopefully we're launching, I think I told you about this initiative called Comedy Cocktails and Conversations, which
Hmm.
I'm going to do some Zoom talking with some comedians. And the idea being that we'll, have some drinks, have some talk, or have some conversations about their comedy and our relationship, and maybe raise some awareness and funding about some particular social issue that we both have a particular interest in. So I'm trying to do that before the end of the month, but I'll kind of keep you posted. But it's coming though.
Cool.
Yeah.
All right. Anything else coming up or anything else that you wanted to mention or?
No, that's it, man. I'm ready to get out of here, you know.
Oh, I know what you mean.
It's time to, so, but
I
anyway.
heard coyotes are reclaiming the streets in Chicago.
They probably walking around. You see a little bit of everything, you know what I mean? It's like nature, you start to feel like, we ain't that significant when it comes down to it. Everything's gonna keep going on, you know?
Yeah,
so,
we're just another species.
That's it. So, but I do think in a weird way, you know, once we get past this, that it's going to be a time if you can just hold on, you know?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's going to be.
What do you think the future of stand-up comedy is going to be? Do you think eventually things will go back to normal and clubs can reopen and theaters can have comedy shows again? Or do you think a lot of it is just going to be taped specials? Because even with a taped special, you want to have an audience.
Yeah, you do.
Yeah.
I always say comedy is a lot like church. That's one of the things I want to be talking to comics about.
Yeah.
So how do you know, it's not the same, but I saw Joel Osteen this weekend.
Okay.
And he was doing his thing like it was an audience in there, you know, and it was like, it was no, but I think culturally speaking, especially, I think that audience interaction is like, that's a major component of it.
And that's how you work out your material. That's how a lot of comedians find out what works and what doesn't is the audience reaction.
Totally. So I think that it's going to be interesting. I like I said, I watch, because I do watch Preachers because I think they're so close to it. And, you know, they were doing it like, you know, only 2 people in the audience. And now I've had shows where it's only 5 people in the place. You know what I mean? Or 10 people show up for a set and they got to do their show. And they can do it. It's not ideal. They can do it. So it may end up being, you record that in front of 5 or 10 people and then you deliver it, you know, digitally or streaming way. I hope that we return to a situation where, you know, we're able to be there live, because I think a true stand-up, you know, can do it in a room with 25 people. I mean, you know, so I think that's it. But I think you're gonna have to tape it, and you're gonna have to, you know, which is a problem too in some instances, because a lot of times comics are like, well, if I do my show online, nobody gonna come see me do it because I tell them the same jokes. But I think it becomes like music. I still want to hear it, even if I've heard it before. Right. So anyway, it's gonna be interesting to see how this delivers. And I saw Bill Maher doing his monologue as if he was at a crowd in front of him this past week. I watched.
Yeah, like, Stephen Colbert and Seth Meyers
and I noticed that, but those shows are highly produced too, though. It looks like it's at home, but I'm like, they did a lot to make this look like it's just at home. You know what I mean? The lighting's right, the camera, it's pretty well done. So, but I think comics are resilient. That's what makes them who they are. So I think they'll find a way. Right, for sure. Yeah.
Well, Raymond, it was great catching up with you. Let's definitely stay in touch, and definitely keep me updated about the All Jokes Aside Collective, and let me know how I can help out.
Absolutely, Chris. Thank you so much, man, for the time.
Thank you.
Okay, sir.
All right. Okay. Talk to you soon.
All right.